Very glad you're with us for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Man, we're already to the middle of the week, but there's still no shortage of news. We're going to be taking a close look at how the Democrats are quickly embracing socialism. So tossing that out there for Bernie Sanders or Zohran Mamdani, not doing the damage you think it does, at least in the Democratic primary, as we already learned this year. We'll also take a look at a very bad moment for the Fourth Estate. ABC News reporter Matt Gutman yesterday, as he reported on the formal charges against the alleged murderer of Charlie Kirk. And we're also going to talk here in just a moment about Joe Manchin's new book, the former West Virginia senator, longtime Democrat, officially now an independent, taking some pretty intense shots at his former party and his former party's leaders. So, Jim, more popcorn. That's always fun. But today is September 17th, which means it's Constitution Day. Yeah, 1787. This was the day it was voted out of the Constitutional Convention. Of course, the states needed to ratify it after that. And, by April of 1789, we had George Washington sworn in as our first president. Jim, after yesterday's dust up about Pam Bondi and her not quite understanding freedom of speech, and you got the left, of course, wishing away the Second Amendment, and you've even got the New York Times and others saying, the Constitution is really impediment to democracy. I think the whole thing's got to go. Everybody who has sworn an oath needs to read this thing and read it now.
When the Attorney General of the United States sees people saying, admittedly, vile things about Charlie Kirk, and feels like, I need to prosecute this. I need to regulate the speech of the United States. Greg, my first thought was, all right, I know where the National Archives is. I have a good sense of where the Department of Justice... It's a short walk. She could go and check there. But then you're holding up an actual... They have lots of copies of this. It's not just the one that's under the glass that you have
right.
to... Are we allowed to do that? Let me go. No, it's right there. Oh, Congress shall make no law. I can't do that. Okay, I guess, and she doesn't have to do this anymore. So... Pam Bondi, I figure somebody in that office must have a copy that you can check when you have these ideas pop into your head.
Yeah, you would hope so at the Justice Department. But like I said, the New York Times and others have called for basically getting rid of the Constitution and creating a new one. The Atlantic earlier this week with an article, How Originalism Killed the Constitution. A radical legal philosophy has undermined the process of constitutional evolution. So this radical concept was figuring out what the founders meant instead of having this living constitution, which is whatever the justices want it to mean.
Yeah. Living constitutions are made of Play-Doh. You can squeeze them, squish them, and put them into any shape you want. Living constitutions are like an airplane where they say, what do you make of this? Well, I can make a hat. I can make a brooch. I can make a pterodactyl. Living Constitution are the shapeshifter from T-1000, to continue my pop culture reference. Like, there's nothing there. Living Constitutions can be anything. So you need a strict construction of the Constitution, a clear sense of what the founders intended and what's supposed to be considered permissible under our Constitution and what's not.
Yeah, very well said. Basically, the left is like, it won't let us do what we want. And they just come up with bigger words to describe it. All right, well, let's talk about something way better than the left's hatred of the Constitution, and that is my mattress. Yeah, Brooklyn Bedding sent Mrs. Columbus and me the Aurora Lux cooling mattress, close to a month and a half ago now, and from the moment we first laid on it, we're like, this is good. This is good. We got medium firmness, but there's a little bit of a pillow top on there, so there's a softness to it as well. Fall asleep quickly, stay asleep, wake up refreshed. It's a great mattress.
Yeah. Listeners, how did you sleep last night? If it's good, okay, fine. But if it wasn't good, maybe it's your mattress. And you can try it out easy peasy from Brooklyn Bedding. They offer you a 120-night comfort trial. Now, you do the math on that. That's like 4 months. I'm guessing like probably after a couple of nights, you'll know that this mattress is really good for you. But let's just say you're a really indecisive person. 120 nights, love it, or they will help you return or swap it hassle-free. And if, Brooklyn Bedding has been awarded the best mattress by CNET and the best hybrid mattress by Wirecutter, so it's the real deal.
Yeah, so go to brooklynbedding.com and use our promo code 3ML at checkout to get 30% off site-wide. This offer is not available anywhere else. That's brooklynbedding.com and the promo code 3ML for 30% off site-wide. Make sure you enter our show name, 3 Martini Lunch, after checkout so they know that we sent you. All right, Jim, let's talk about Joe Manchin, the longtime Democrat governor of West Virginia. Then he appointed himself senator after the death of Robert Byrd, won re-election a couple of times. By most accounts, the most moderate Democrat for pretty much the whole time he was in the Senate, if not all of that. He did not run for re-election ultimately last year. He is persona non grata inside the Democratic Party because he and Kyrsten Sinema did not go along with Democratic efforts to change the filibuster when there was a 50-50 and a 51-49 Senate in favor of the Democrats. But he's got a new book out, of course. He's an ex-politician. Of course, he has a new book out. It's called Dead Center. I think he's trying to say that he's in the dead center, not that the center of his party is dead, but that's true, too. So maybe it covers both things. And he's tearing into...
It's a metaphor, Greg. It works. It works on multiple levels.
It works either
George
way.
Lucas used to say, it's like a poem. It rhymes.
So over at Free Beacon, they have some of the quotes here with Manchin tearing into his own party and his own leadership, blasting woke ideology and so forth. Manchin says, I don't say this lightly, but under the leadership of President Obama and Majority Leader Harry Reid, and later President Biden and Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrats have systematically tried to weaken the very guardrails that have protected our democracy for generations, all in the name of advancing their agenda. He says when the party pushes hard on woke ideology, DEI mandates, and other social agendas, it creates unnecessary divisions, alienates everyday citizens, and moves us further away from the common sense middle ground where most Americans actually live their lives. And so what he's referring to, of course, is Harry Reid changing the rules in the Senate during the Obama years, where you no longer had to get to 60 votes to cut off debate, but a simple up or down vote on every nomination except for Supreme Court justices. That later changed when Republicans got control in the first Trump administration. And then Chuck Schumer trying to kill the legislative filibuster for specific votes, allegedly, during the Biden years. And so Joe Manchin, very resolutely, in the face of a lot of Democratic heat, refused to change the filibusters, so we're always grateful for that. Kyrsten Sinema as well. But Jim, good for him for pointing out this is just the truth of how we got here. Obama and Harry Reid played hardball, and it blew up in their face, really. And then Biden and Schumer tried to do it again and would have gotten away with it if it weren't for those meddling independent Democrats.
Greg, you and I have had some past beefs with Senator Manchin, apparently to get him on board with what is effectively, another big spending green energy bill. You just have to call it the Inflation Reduction Act. Right. Presto change. If you wait, why didn't you tell me it was going to reduce inflation? Which, by the way, it did not reduce inflation. But by and large, you got the feeling that Joe Manchin was a good faith negotiator, always wanted to figure out how to get to the deal, was willing to compromise, and recognized, that he was a Democrat who represented a very culturally conservative state. That meant that he was going to be on board with a large portion of the Democratic Party's spending agenda and economic agenda. But he was also going to be pro-gun, and by the standards of Democrats, he was not a resolute supporter of abortion. And so, that's somebody you could reach a deal with. Now, earlier in the week, we talked about John Fetterman. He's probably the closest thing we have to a successor to Manchin or Sinema. But just the fact that a guy like Joe Manchin got effectively driven out of his party, would he have faced a very difficult re-election bid in West Virginia? Yes. Would Senate Republicans have done their part to beat the hell out of him? Yes. Was it going to be really tough to run for re-election when Trump was running again? Yes. But all in all, yes, Senate Republicans, who do they like to have around? They probably miss the guy. This was a guy who, again, was always trying to figure out how do we get to yes, and he wasn't going to line up with you and everything. And the fact that he's willing to point out that, if you look at our the intense partisan divisions and why the Senate is not the world's greatest deliberative chamber, and why it's not, that the founders had argued that, the House was where ideas were going to bubble up from, and the Senate was where the tea was supposed to cool. It was supposed to be where we were supposed to carefully consider the idea and decide whether this is a really good idea to avoid any, sudden rush to judgment. If it's not like that anymore, a lot of it has to do with Harry Reid. Way to go, Nevada. Way to go. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it has to do with subsequent decisions made by Schumer. And this idea that, but I don't, Greg, have you heard for many Democrats calling for getting rid of the filibuster since January 20th?
No, not the
January
minority.
3rd, really.
Nope.
Yeah.
It's amazing when they're in the minority.
Wasn't this a tool of Jim Crow? Wasn't this? Well, it's not. It's not in the Constitution. Therefore, all of a sudden, the filibuster is good again. Go figure. We can all see this, right? We can all remember this when, Amy Klobuchar, I believe, was someone who said, yeah, maybe in retrospect, it's a good thing that we have the filibuster. You think? No Senate majorities are ever, there. And Manchin was the kind of guy who, whether Republicans controlled the chamber or Democrats controlled the chamber, seemed to get along with everybody enough and was always trying to figure, all right, I'm not going to get everything I want, but how can I get what I really need in legislation? It would be nice to see more of it. Congratulations on the book deal. I don't know how many Democrats are still listening, but I'm just going to point out, you look at the states that Biden won and then that Harris won. Doesn't add up to a Senate majority. Maybe they'll be lucky and they'll have a situation like Georgia where, egregious mistakes on the part of Republicans end up, handing them 2 seats. But you can't count on that in a lot of red states. A lot of red states are just going to vote for Republican senators. So you need the Joe Manchins. You need the John Fettermans. You need somebody who can get elected in a state that isn't all that reliably Democrat. And, it sounds like Democrats just don't want to hear it from Joe Manchin or from anybody else.
No, that's definitely true. And now we've got Jim Justice in that seat, who's even richer than Manchin, which is not easy. And of course, he's got that bulldog that he loves to tote around with him so much. And, but you're right. And by the way, if at some point there's a Democratic president, Democratic House, Democratic Senate, Amy Klobuchar will completely forget the lesson she learned. Saying that we shouldn't kill the filibuster. Once Democrats are in a position to benefit from it, if they ever are, she'll be right back in line. There's no way that she's actually learned the real lesson there. So just a little tip. All right, let's talk about tips for your business, because when it comes to making sure that you stay up with everything that's happening, not only in your business, but in the world around you, NetSuite by Oracle is the way you want to go, because you're never going to know what's happening on Wall Street or with interest rates. We'll find out later from the Fed on that today. We think they're going down. Inflation, we just talked about that. You're never sure what that's going to look like long term. But for more than 42,000 businesses, they have future-proofed their business with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR into one fluid platform.
Greg, because the New York Jets give me so little to cheer for on most Sundays, I've gotten into the habit of looking at the rest of the league and trying to pick, who's going to win against the point spread, against the spread. And I do pretty good. Past week, 3 out of 5. I don't do nearly enough where I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to become a professional gambler and bet real money. I could really use an Oracle. Your businesses could use an Oracle. And you may not have somebody with a crystal ball, but the next best thing is, NetSuite by Oracle. 42,000 businesses have future-proofed their business with NetSuite by Oracle. It's the #1 cloud ERP, which brings accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR to one fluid platform. And with real-time insights and forecasting, you'll be able to peer into the future with actionable data. So you're closing the books in days instead of weeks, spending less time looking backwards and more time on what's next.
Yeah, make the most of your opportunities with NetSuite by Oracle. And speaking of opportunity, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/martini. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/martini. That's netsuite.com/martini. All right, Jim. Yesterday was a pretty big day out there in Utah. The charges were officially filed against the alleged murderer of Charlie Kirk. The suspected shooter will face charges of aggravated murder, 2 counts of obstruction of justice, a felony discharge of a firearm causing serious bodily injury, 2 counts of witness tampering, and commission of a violent offense in the presence of a child. That should have been the biggest part of the story that happened yesterday. But ABC News reporter Matt Gutman just couldn't help himself, because in addition to outlining the charges, there was more evidence released by local authorities, including a long list of text exchanges where basically the accused killer confessed the crime to his boyfriend, who of course is supposedly transitioning to a woman. It's pretty cut and dried there. I did it, that kind of thing. And so Matt Gutman, could have talked about the clarity of the confession, could have talked about the severity of the charges, but no. We're going to humanize and sympathize the killer.
We have seen an alleged murder with such specific text messages about the alleged murder weapon, where it was hidden, how it was placed, what was on it, but also it was very touching in a way that I think many of us didn't expect. A very intimate portrait into this relationship between the suspect's roommate and the suspect himself, with him repeatedly calling his roommate who was transitioning calling him my love, and I want to protect you, my love. So it was this duality of someone who the attorney said not only jeopardized the life of Charlie Kirk and the crowd, but was doing it in front of children, which is one of the aggravating circumstances of this case. And on the other hand, he was, speaking so lovingly about his partner. So a very interesting and, as Pierre said, riveting press conference, David.
Touching, cowboy. Touching, as Hans Gruber told us in Die Hard. So, Jim, I mean, Charlie Kirk in the mainstream media is out there being described as polarizing, controversial, inflammatory. Everybody's got to get in their worst moments that they think Charlie Kirk ever had in his ubiquitous media presence. But once we have this situation, and if you look at the text exchanges, they're not really all that sentimental. It's just, here's what happened all day long here. But apparently ABC, or Matt Gutman in particular, can't let the trans advocacy get derailed here, or we just somehow have to empathize with the killer of a conservative. What in the world is going on here?
Greg, there are days I'm glad I write a morning newsletter as opposed to an afternoon or evening one, because had I written about this yesterday afternoon, when these comments started rocketing around social media, I was in full-on Mugatu from Zoolander mode of, does no one else see this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. This just because first of all, today's Morning Jolt is all about this. And I kind of try to put this into the context of multiple cases of this, not just in the horrible shooting of Charlie Kirk, but thinking back to Luigi Mangione, which, by the way, there was a big rally in New York yesterday because they dropped one of the charges, and everybody is celebrating that. Like, it's, you think it was New Year's Eve over there or something. I don't get it. You kind of knew somebody was going to. Just as ABC correspondents say a bunch of things that are appropriate and accurate. Sure, I could almost even see what a horrible tragedy this is for the family who had to turn in their son, and knowing that this is a crime for which the prosecutors will seek the death penalty. Yeah, I could almost see the argument of, like, at one point from coverage of the Wall Street Journal and other places, this kid did have his head grown on straight. He seemed like a normal kid like 5 years ago. And then all of a sudden he's turned into this twisted, murdering assassin. Like that, if you want to say that's an unbelievably sad story, okay, fine. Touching? I just was beside myself with this idea that this was the angle that stood out to him, that he was Romeo and Juliet on cable last night or something? Like, what puts somebody in a mindset where after that press conference laying this all out, that's the takeaway. That's one of the points he feels needs to be front and center in this coverage. Now, he subsequently apologized, and I'm glad that he did. But I just, in today's newsletter, I just went through this and I'm like, why are you like this, mainstream media? Why is it? Because, like, when it's a right-wing criminal, when it's a right-wing act of political violence, they see it 2020. They see it with perfect clarity. In fact, sometimes they even go a little bit further and kind of say that, the reason that a Cesar Sayoc type guy is sending out ticking time bombs is because the right wing is full of ticking time bombs themselves, right? The idea that there's something reflective of it, Now, when it's a left-wing piece of violence, as we've seen for the past week, we get a lot of both sides do this, which is true enough, but I don't see them quick to emphasize that there are left-wing cases of political violence when a right-winger does it. And it often feels like what are you going to do? Both sides do this. There's nothing that we can necessarily, it always has to be put in the context of, don't get mad at progressivism. Don't get mad at the Democrats. Don't get mad at the left. This is just a thing that happens. There's nothing, no greater lessons to be learned here. And it's maddening. You kind of knew somebody was going to do what Matthew Dowd did on MSNBC the other day. You knew somebody was going to start talking about what a terrible guy Charlie Kirk was, right? By the way, I recognize that the discussion of Charlie Kirk since his assassination, certainly there are a whole bunch of people who don't want to think about the more controversial things Charlie Kirk has ever said. Somebody dies, you don't necessarily talk about their flaws. You don't talk about their worst moments. There's a reason we say don't speak ill of the dead. So yeah, maybe people are building him up into a saint that he may not have been in real life. But you know what? All these people just saw him get murdered in front of their eyes. Right? Cut him a little slack. Okay, I think it's okay. And those of us who say the Kennedy presidency, right? When you get assassinated in front of everyone suddenly and horrifically, right, with your kids around, right? Like no wonder people are like, they don't want to dwell on any mistakes or misdeeds of the departed. Like I don't think you can begrudge people for that. I think there'll be a time and a place if you want to be critical of Charlie Kirk. This is really not the best time. This is a really time you got to let people grieve and channel all these emotions that they're going through. And as for the shooter, how did I know somebody was going to take a stance that was somewhat sympathetic or romanticizing this? Why did I know somebody on CNN was going to feel the need to romanticize Luigi Mangione? Oh, by the way, that special got nominated for an Emmy, right?
Of course it did.
Right, why did CNN feel the need to say that the protests up in Kenosha, Wisconsin, were fiery but mostly peaceful, when it's the towering inferno behind the correspondent live on TV at that point? Why do they do this? And so I kind of end this with it sounds like it's a bad relationship. Mainstream media, why are you like this? Who made you this way? Who hurt you? This kind of sense because this is not normal. This is not. Why is there this reflexive need to explain away, to romanticize, to justify left-wing violence, whereas right-wing violence gets seen clearly and denounced the way it should be? This is, you and I are not a pro-right-wing violence podcast. This is a bad. Don't go hurt people. Don't shoot people. Don't do any of that kind of stuff. But why is there, how did I know somebody was going to do this yesterday? And it is, somebody's making the argument, this is the culture within these news organizations. And I think that's the case, that they just can't see violence committed by somebody on the left side of the spectrum, which is why we saw for the last couple of days, this insistence, the shooter had to be on the right wing somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he had Republican parents. So I
realize I'm not supposed to rant on this podcast, right? But sometimes it just erupts out of me like a volcano.
Well, just the hypocrisy is so intense, and you're right to mention the Gutman apology towards the end. He says, "Let there be zero doubt. I unequivocally condemn this horrific crime and the pain it caused Charlie Kirk's family, etc." But the first thing he said is, "Yesterday I tried to underscore the jarring contrast between this cold-blooded assassination of Charlie Kirk, a man who dedicated his life to public dialogue, and the personal, disturbing text read aloud by the Utah County attorney at the press conference." He didn't say touching this time, so I guess that's an improvement. Yeah. But, Jim, that's not the story. The story is that this kid is accused of this horrific crime. The evidence seems to be piling up in an incontrovertible way. And that's what you should be talking about, not trying to romanticize it, which is exactly what Gutman did here.
Yeah, you're speaking off the cuff. You're on live television. You try to cut a little bit of slack in that category. But I just can't believe that's where his mind went. And that there was this idea of the shooter believed in his mind that he was protecting his lover by shooting and murdering Charlie Kirk. Well, that's crazy, right? Why would you even imply? Well, in his mind, he was doing the right. Yes, every murderer is convinced they're doing the right thing. It's screenwriting 101. Every villain believes he's the hero of the story. So, it's not surprising that this guy was convinced he was a noble and all that. The idea is that the rest of us are not supposed to feed into these people's delusions, and it doesn't happen when somebody goes on CNN like Taylor Lorenz and says he's a very moral person. No, he's not. He shot somebody in the back.
Right. Just unbelievable. Yeah. Boy, this letter from this serial killer, it's very deranged, but his penmanship is lovely. He writes really well. No! Keep your eye on what matters here. So some of you people need to see a doctor, and ZocDoc is definitely the way to go for that. Jim and I have both used ZocDoc. Mine was after having a not good experience with a specialist, and then a friend recommended a different specialist in that field. It was an ENT. Did the research on ZocDoc, made the appointment, been going to her ever since. It's been a great find, and ZocDoc could not have made it easier.
Yeah. Why do people, in particular guys, not go to the doctor? Well, it's inconvenient, we say. Also, we're indestructible and we're immortal and we never have anything to worry about. And that's just ordinary back pain. There's not, Well, I needed an optometrist. My old optometrist was back where I used to live. It's a while away. And I'm like, go into ZocDoc, and I find one that's 5 minutes away. I no longer have that excuse. I no longer can explain away, I don't need to have my eyes checked. And, thankfully my checkup was pretty good. Now, on ZocDoc, you can filter for doctors who take your insurance, if they're located nearby, if you're a good fit for any medical need you might have, and see if they're highly rated by verified patients. Once you find the right doctor, you see their actual appointment openings, choose a time slot that works for you, and you can click to instantly book a visit.
Yeah, ZocDoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare high-quality in-network doctors and click to instantly book that appointment. So stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/3ML to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/3ML. ZocDoc.com/3ML. All right, Jim, on to our final martini, our crazy martini now. And you're not going to dissuade too many Democrats these days from voting for crazy radical candidates by calling them socialists. That's because the label socialist is now extremely popular inside the Democratic Party. Harry Enton over at CNN has demonstrated through polling just how much this positive impact, this positive mindset towards socialism has changed just since 2010. Listen to these numbers.
Socialism is not a four-letter word in Democratic primaries, not among Democratic voters. It's a five-letter word in the minds of a lot of Democrats, that five-letter word being great. Look at this. Net popularity of socialism among Democrats. You go back to 2010, it was plus 7 points. Look how high it is now, up like a rocket, up to plus 36 points. That's a jump of nearly 30 points on the net popularity scale among Democrats in just 15 years.
So, Jim, I mean, plus 36 in the Democratic Party. This is a party that is literally embracing socialism. He also had numbers showing that since 2010, Democrats have gone from plus 8 on capitalism, which means they were roughly the same in positive territory with capitalism and socialism back in 2010. But now it's minus 13 for capitalism. The only good news here is that among all adults, socialism is still in the hole at minus 12, and capitalism is plus 18. So the more the Democrats run with this, it's going to work with their people, but at least for now, it's not going to work with the general electorate.
So there are a bunch of reasons this is our crazy martini. One, I just kind of jumps out at this is that since the Trump era, right, back at the 2016 Democratic Convention in Philadelphia, I saw Chuck Schumer insisting that, because people ask aren't you worried about Trump picking up votes amongst, blue collar whites? And Schumer said, well, for every one blue collar white that he picks up in, rural America, we're going to pick up 2 white collar whites in suburbia. Well, the math didn't work that well for Hillary Clinton. You could argue they went back to the House in 2018, so maybe there was a value to that. 2020 shook out the way it did. Biden won. And you could make it very much an argument that the two parties have shifted key demographics, right? That effectively Republicans have picked up a lot more blue-collar, working-class voters. What we used to characterize as Reagan Democrats, so it's not the first time these folks have been interested in the Republican Party. And they have and certain much higher percentages of Latinos, blacks, minority groups, etc. And along the way, they've given up some of those white-collar suburbanites, some of the little old ladies, some of the folks who were probably Romney and McCain Republicans have looked at Trump and said, I can't vote for this anymore. And so they're either independent or Democratic. I would not expect those demographics to be pro-socialism, right? Like, to me, socialism is a loser's philosophy. Socialism is, I want everybody fair because I can't compete, because I'm never going to make a lot of money. I'm never going to own a home. I'm never going to have all these things that the American dream is supposed to have. It's not that I've failed myself. It's that capitalism and America has failed me. Ergo, I need Bernie Sanders and AOC, and I need all these people who I completely trust to make the system fair for me. Elizabeth Warren knows what's best. If she gave Greg Columbus that much trouble over his mailbox, she's going to know. I find this all nonsensical. But the other thing I want to point out here is that I'd really love to ask these people, so you're a supporter of socialism. Has true socialism ever been tried? My guess is a significant chunk would say, correct. It's never been tried. Now here's the thing. The reason they say this is because all kinds of things that are socialism get tried, and very, very often it's a disaster. Very, very often it ends in gulags and death camps and, the Uyghurs being, put up into concentration camps. Chinese Communist Party. Now, you can make an argument they're not that communist anymore, that they're basically authoritarian capitalist or, willing to give people some economic freedom as long as they can still squash them like a bug the moment you speak out against the government. But, best case scenario with socialism, you get something like the European Social Democratic parties. And if you're looking at Norway as a success story, you know how you can be a country like Norway? Have a lot of oil and gas reserves, right? When you're sitting on a giant pile of money, look, go figure. All of a sudden it becomes easier to make your country's finances work, and you can be kind of socialist or have a big, extensive social safety net. Very often with sometimes you get North Korea, right? Sometimes you get systems that are really unfree, really unprosperous, really spreading around the misery. And the worst part is, like, if socialists, generally when they get power, they never look at the disaster and say, oh, that's terrible. That didn't work. Let's go back. It's often, we have saboteurs. The capitalist running dog pigs have, infiltrated us and have foiled our latest 5-year plan and all that stuff. So, like, it is really a bad sign. It's a little counterintuitive considering the demographic changes we have. And again, I think, somebody has pointed out that Mamdani up in New York, his most ardent supporters are people who have successful, wealthy parents, and they themselves are not successful and wealthy. And they don't look at it and say, I haven't done a good enough job. The system has failed. Because it couldn't possibly be that they're flawed, right, Greg?
No, not at all.
Couldn't be their fault. Yeah.
No, just utterly ridiculous. And so, and then the media is going to fangirl, because remember, it's kind of like one of those issues where, no, that's not socialism. Okay, well, actually, it is socialism, but it's good. And then when Obama gets elected, I can't remember if it was Time or Newsweek, we're all socialists now.
Newsweek's cover, yes. We are all socialists now. And a whole bunch of us like, where are we? I don't remember that memo. Wait, when? Yeah.
Yes, and so, you're going to have people insisting, the Democratic Party as a whole is not socialist. And then by next year, 2028, well, actually, they are, but it's totally the right direction for the country when it's
pre-election,
exactly
he's a centrist. Then he gets elected. Hey, guess what? You voted for socialism, right?
Right.
Credit to Bernie. At least he's open about it.
Exactly. We tried to tell you, people. We tried to tell you, and you still have time, New York, but it's not looking great. Jim, have a great Wednesday. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch podcast if you don't already, and tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Huge help to us. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a terrific Wednesday. Please join us again Thursday for the 3 Martini Lunch.